His hands trembled as he closed his fingers around the coins. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like a scream. One footstep from a guard, one flicker of a lamp in the wrong hallway, and there would be no escape. Only chains, or worse, a cross. This was the night a young slave decided he would rather die running than live one more day in captivity. But what nobody could have predicted, not even the young man clutching those stolen coins, was that his real journey wouldn't be the escape at all. It would be the terrifying choice to go back. To understand how a runaway slave ended up walking willingly toward the man he had wronged, we have to start at the beginning. In the ancient city of Colossae, there lived a wealthy and respected man named Philemon. He was known throughout the region, a man of influence, the kind of person whose home was always full of guests. And Philemon was also something else, a follower of Christ. Every week, his courtyard filled with believers who gathered to worship, share meals, and speak of a God who loved every person equally, master and servant alike. But when the gathering ended and the guests went home, the walls of that same house told a very different story. Because within those walls lived a man who, by Roman law, wasn't considered a man at all. His name was Onesimus, and under the empire's laws, he was property, nothing more than a tool with a heartbeat. His very name meant useful, a constant, quiet reminder of the only value Rome believed he had. Week after week, he stood in the corner of that same courtyard, watching free men speak of grace and freedom, only to be sent back to scrub floors and serve wine the moment the prayers ended. There is a particular kind of suffering in hearing about liberty while living in chains, and for Onesimus, that suffering built slowly, silently, year after year, until something inside him finally broke. He decided he would run, but freedom, he knew, required more than courage. It required resources he didn't have. So before he disappeared into the night, he slipped into Philemon's chambers and took what he could, a pouch of silver coins. It was a decision that would follow him for the rest of his life, because in the Roman world, a runaway slave was already condemned, but a runaway slave who had also stolen from his master was as good as dead. If caught, the punishment wasn't a warning. It was an iron brand burned into his forehead, marking him forever as a fugitive. Or it was the arena, thrown before starving beasts for the crowd's entertainment. Or it was a cross, left to die slowly under the desert sun, as a lesson to every other slave who might consider the same defiance. Knowing all of this, Onesimus ran anyway. He moved through back alleys and hid in the shadows of merchant carts. He crossed provinces on foot, driven only by the desperate hope of disappearing completely. And there was only one place in the empire large enough, loud enough, and chaotic enough to swallow a man whole: Rome. With over 1 million people crammed into its streets, Rome was the perfect place to vanish. Onesimus buried himself in its poorest corners, renting whatever shelter he could find, spending his stolen coins one by one just to survive. But stolen silver runs out, and when the last coin was spent, reality set in with brutal clarity. He had no legal identity, no family, no protection, and no way to seek honest work without someone eventually asking the one question he could never answer: who is your master? He was alone in the largest city in the world, and slowly he began to starve. Worse than the hunger was the fear. Every knock on a door sent his heart racing. Every glance from a Roman soldier felt like a death sentence waiting to be carried out. Bounty hunters made their living, finding men exactly like him. He had crossed an empire to escape his chains, but in truth, he had only traded one prison for another, a prison built entirely out of terror. And then, in the middle of that darkness, his path crossed with a man named Paul. Paul was no ordinary man. He was one of the most influential voices in the early Christian movement. But at that moment, he wasn't preaching to crowds. He was a prisoner himself, held under house arrest, physically chained day and night to a Roman soldier as he awaited judgment from the emperor. No one knows exactly how a starving fugitive found his way into the chained apostles' quarters, but he did. And in that moment, Paul had every legal right, and perhaps every practical reason, to hand the runaway slave over to the authorities. He didn't. Instead, Paul looked at the exhausted, terrified young man in front of him and offered something Onesimus had never been given in his entire life: dignity. Paul spoke to him not of Roman law, but of a different kind of freedom, one that no emperor could grant and no master could take away. He told him that in the eyes of God, he wasn't property, he wasn't a tool, he was a son. And sitting on the floor of a prison cell, listening to a chained man describe a love greater than anything Rome could offer, Onesimus surrendered his life to that truth. The change in him was immediate. The man who once ran to save himself now chose to stay, not out of fear, but out of devotion. He served Paul faithfully, running errands through the dangerous streets, preparing meals, tending to every need of the aging apostle. For the first time in his life, Onesimus lived up to the meaning of his own name, not because a whip forced him to, but because love did. Paul came to cherish him deeply, later writing that Onesimus had become like his own heart, his own son in the faith. But beneath the peace of those months in Rome, Paul carried a heavy truth. No matter how transformed Onesimus was spiritually, Roman law still recognized him as Philemon's property, and harboring him meant Paul himself was sheltering a fugitive, a serious crime. More than that, Paul understood something deeper. Real freedom couldn't be built on a foundation of an unresolved wrong. The debt was still there, the broken trust was still there, and it needed to be faced, not buried. So Paul made one of the hardest decisions of his ministry. He told Onesimus he had to return to Colossae, to walk back, willingly, into the house of the man he had robbed and betrayed, a man who had every legal right to end his life the moment he arrived. And astonishingly, Onesimus agreed. That decision alone reveals everything about how deeply his heart had changed. He wasn't fleeing anymore. He wasn't hiding. He was choosing to face the consequences of his past head-on, armed with nothing but faith and a letter Paul had written on his behalf. When Onesimus finally arrived back at Philemon's estate, there was no dramatic escape left to attempt. He stood before the man he had wronged and handed him Paul's letter. And as Philemon unrolled the parchment and began to read, he encountered one of the most radical requests in early Christian history. Paul didn't command Philemon as an apostle. He didn't demand. He appealed to love, to grace, to everything Philemon claimed to believe every single Sunday in his own courtyard. Paul wrote that Onesimus had become like a son to him, and he asked Philemon to receive him back, not as a slave to be punished, but as a brother to be embraced. It was an almost unthinkable request in a world built on rigid class and ownership, asking a Roman master to treat his own runaway property as a spiritual equal. And what about the theft? What about the stolen silver that had started this entire journey? Paul erased that debt entirely. He wrote that if Onesimus owed anything, Philemon should charge it to Paul's own account, that he himself would repay it personally. A guilty man's debt carried willingly onto innocent shoulders. Scripture never records the exact expression on Philemon's face as he finished reading those words. But history tells us what happened next, because that very letter survived. It was copied, treasured, and eventually preserved as part of the sacred scriptures, something that never would have happened if Philemon had torn it apart and carried out the punishment the law demanded. Instead, tradition holds that Philemon did exactly what Paul asked. He let go of his anger. He surrendered his right to vengeance. He forgave. And that is how the story of Onesimus ends. Not as a slave who was punished for his betrayal, but as a man who found the courage to return, to face the consequences of his past, and to be transformed by a forgiveness he never could have earned on his own.